Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, and tonight we'll be talking Kobe Bryant's retirement and can he still shoot? The 76ers, can they find a way to win? Spoiler alert, it looks like they can. And finally, which rookies of the year are we impressed with? And surprise, surprise, it's not who you might think. With me is Patrick Minton. You've been busy. Obviously, we're full on holiday season, but I am so excited to have you on, Patrick. Give a shout out.
Hey guys, it's good to be back.
All right, and as always, you can find Patrick on Twitter as NBA Geek. The show is produced by Brian Foster, our voice of God himself, and he is on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say hey, Brian, just so they can hear your voice.
What's up, guys? Hope the 76ers get this win. I'm starting to feel bad for them.
Oh, well, it's just for people. We are recording this on the precipice of greatness for the 76ers with 33 seconds left in the game. They are up 103 to 91, if NBA.com isn't lying to me. And Kobe Bryant has shot an amazing 7 for 25 in this game. So barring a Tracy McGrady-like performance in the last 30 seconds, Kobe Bryant and the 76ers will both keep doing what they do. I will say I've got to give a shout out. Patrick, you and I were both talking to this. Thank you, Internet, for autoplay. NBA.com. Every time I try and check a box score live during the show, it actually turns into a tightrope act because stuff starts playing in my ear and I try and keep talking. I think I made it through it. All right. So, Patrick, the big news, which could be good and bad. I think it's good in the short term for the box score geeks because if there's something we love, if there's something I have made a career of, it's bashing Kobe. So in the short term, we're going to have tons of articles, but long term, we're losing one of our key demos for articles and for page views. The most rabid fans are Kobe haters that just love hopping in to tell me how crazy I am. But he announced
Kobe lovers. You think you're a Kobe hater?
Oh yeah, I'm the Kobe hater. Kobe haters agree with me, and then Kobe lovers hop in to tell me how crazy I am. But he announced his retirement. I have tons to say on this, but I'll let you get the first word. I mean, I'm obviously not surprised, but what are your thoughts on the Kobe retirement announcement and the other debacles with the Lakers this season?
Well, I don't think it really surprised anybody that he's retiring. I think the big surprise for me was that he didn't retire after, was it the 2013 season when he got his Achilles injury? But the thing is, at the time, it never entered my mind that Jim Buss would offer him $50 million to play 2 more years. Because obviously, if anyone's going to offer you $50 million to play basketball for 2 more years, you just say yes. You don't really think about it that long. But I think it's kind of obvious to everybody that he's done. To us, it's kind of been obvious since last year, but.
Well, I should give him a shout out because if you had looked at kind of the age curve, Kobe really after the 2012 season looked like 2013 should be his last year. He had been on the decline
exactly.
for 2 years, and he has this great turnaround in 2013. And it's actually it was for all the bashing we give him on his shooting efficiency. 2013 was one of his most efficient seasons as a player.
His best years, period. He was amazing.
And then of course it turns out if you're in your mid 30s and you're playing 40 minutes a night. I think he blew out his Achilles near the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Achilles tendon injuries, it's just like no one comes back from that. And the ones that do, no one is the same coming back from that. And the ones that do come back and are somewhat successful after that are just different types of players. I mean, you look at like a player like, for example, Chauncey Billups, who, didn't rely on a ton of athleticism even before that, but after he came back, he just was nowhere near the same type of player he was before, even accounting for age. He learned to do the things, the little things. He learned to just be smart about things and be sort of efficient by doing some smart things in the court. But there's just no way you could come back from an injury like that and be Kobe Bryant. I mean, because it's obvious that Kobe Bryant, the reason that people in the media have made so much sort of fun of him is not because we're all reveling in the decline of a superstar. It's because it's very clear that like 37-year-old Bryant is trying really hard to be 28-year-old Kobe Bryant. I mean, he just hasn't made any concessions to age at all. Hasn't tried to do anything different from his game. He's just trying to be the same player he used to be, and not only that, but he's in complete denial about it whenever he's interviewed about it.
Well, so one thing that I've really been enjoying on the show, I'll say my weekly column, the top 10 box scores, that's actually a guilty pleasure for me. It's something I'm going to keep doing just because it's an easy article to do and I have fun with it every week.
Yeah.
But a player that made it this week is Tim Duncan. And most smart people, I think I saw a tweet, I can't remember the person, but I apologize, said they find it kind of odd of the number of people saying how Kobe Bryant is the player of his generation and how great he is when, Kobe Bryant came into the league in 1996, 1997, that season. He was a high schooler. And as Dave Barry was on a podcast this week, I think Bloomberg Radio, and they asked him about Kobe's immediate impact. And he made the point, Kobe was really young. He was a high schooler. He didn't play a lot for the Lakers initially. He wasn't very good. It took him a few seasons to develop. And, Tim Duncan came in after completing all 4 years of college, but he came in 98. So their time span of being productive NBA players is virtually identical. And it's really weird for people to point to Kobe and say he's the greatest, he's the MJ of our generation, and kind of ignore Tim Duncan over here who's played productive. And I think part of what you were saying, the concessions to ages, I'm looking at Tim Duncan's basketball reference page, and when he turns 30, he plays 80 games in 2,700 minutes, and that is the last time he cracks 2,700 minutes in his career. And if you watch year after year, his minutes just go down, down, down. He plays fewer games. Popovich has become notorious for being willing to rest Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, other old players on back-to-backs. Tim Duncan is played till he's 39, which is remarkable, and he's still playing top level. A huge difference between him and Kobe, though, is right around the time he hit 30, he said, I'm older and I can't play like I'm young. Whereas Kobe, I'm taking a look at his thing, I don't think he's ever dropped, the lowest he had was that 6-game stint when he got injured 2 seasons ago. Kobe has never dropped below like 34 minutes a game. And until this season, he's at 31. And for comparison, like the Warriors are playing their young Bucks that many minutes, or playing their young Bucks less than Kobe's trying to play himself as an old person.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that keeps going through my head and has all season long is that old famous Phil Jackson, Bill Simmons interview where I can't remember if it was Phil that said it or Bill Simmons that said it, talking to Phil. I think it was Bill Simmons that said it, is like, this was like 5 or 6 years ago. He said, he said the worst thing you would want to do is to coach Kobe when he's no longer Kobe. And I think that's been the case for like 4 years now. He's been more or less uncoachable in the sense that he just does whatever he wants to do. Every single coach that the Lakers have had after Phil Jackson has essentially just been a Kobe yes man. And it obviously doesn't work out well because even though Kobe is not still Kobe, he thinks he's still Kobe. So he does, he plays tons of minutes, and he also like has this crazy sort of style where he's just trying to force up shots constantly, and he doesn't have the talent to be even mediocre efficient at that. Like, let's be clear, as you and I have often said, he was never particularly efficient at a lot of those shots. The big reason Kobe was efficient at all was his getting to the line. He was never particularly efficient at those, jumpers that he forced up, the turnaround jumpers and the fadeaways and the things that he sort of forced all the time. He was never particularly efficient at those. But now in his old age, he's like not even mediocre efficient at those shots. And really, for the last few years, it's been watching one coach after another kind of be made a fool of by Kobe.
Yeah, and I mean, have you been reading any of the Byron Scott interviews that they've been gold this season?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll try and remember some for the links, but basically there was one where he says, well, Kobe's seniority has earned him the right to take the shots he wants to. And, all of these things where he says he's not going to cut Kobe's minutes back. And I think to your point, it's kind of, if I'm Byron Scott, I think that's what you have to say, because it's become very apparent that this management just doesn't want to give up on Kobe. And it's really funny to me, by the way, the Lakers, in that the Lakers were willing to show Shaq the door over money. The Lakers were, willing to put Lamar Odom on the block when he was still a productive six-man. The Lakers were more than willing, and I can't actually fault them for this. They were more than willing to part ways with Pau Gasol when it looked like it could have gotten them Chris Paul. So it's remarkable to me that this organization in general has been willing to show they've had no problem being willing to like let certain superstars see the door. Story Brian and I were talking about, I may have to write about this, is in the mid 80s, they were trying to target Ralph Sampson in one of the drafts. And because they couldn't secure the rights to the number one pick, they did end up getting it, but they couldn't secure the rights to it. Ralph Sampson goes back to school and they end up drafting James Worthy instead. In another history, they trade away most of their players, let Kareem walk, and try and build around Ralph Sampson, and that would have been completely different. So this team has had no problem with lack of loyalty to their stars, with the basic exception of Magic Johnson and Kobe Bryant, and I'll give them one of those two. You know,
Yeah, and it's funny because everybody seems to people just keep glossing over how in pretty much the entire year before the Pau Gasol trade, Kobe was just ranting and railing over management, essentially wanted to be traded and like was pissed off that management couldn't put a winning team around him. Nobody talks about that anymore, that he essentially was asking for a trade in 2007.
oh yeah, and I
We
mean
just all pretend that didn't happen, I guess. And
yeah.
Kobe himself pretends that didn't happen. He pretends like he says things about Lakers for life and pretends that that's the way he always felt, when it was very clear that there was a time in the mid 2000s where he didn't feel that way at all. So it's kind of I don't understand even from a signaling standpoint of saying, let's pay Kobe 25 million so that other superstars around the league know we take care of our players. Even from that standpoint, it just doesn't make any sense. No, they could have easily, if they wanted to give him a little bit of a golden parachute, they could have easily made this last contract be like for 12 million a year instead of for 25 million a year, and nobody would have batted an eyelash, because he was still rehabbing from pretty much the most devastating injury you could possibly get as a basketball player.
And he was doing that, I think he was 35, maybe 35 or 36 at the time, which is ridiculous. And I love your point on his signal. I guess the one last point I'll put on that, because I could talk even more on that, is something Kobe has done his entire career, and this has been very forced. It's worth noting, if you haven't seen the fantastic 30 for 30 Soul Man about Sonny Vaccaro, you got to watch it. And essentially, Kobe is one of these people that has had a big shoe company. It was Adidas at the time. Adidas was in his corner from when he was in high school, and they were getting behind marketing him as the next Michael Jordan. They were behind, they had some of the best minds, the most well-connected people in basketball, ensuring that he ended up on the Lakers. They were trying to keep him off a bad team. All of this was very intentional. And I think what's funny in a way to me is that it worked. It's Michael Jordan was one of the most effectively marketed players in NBA history, and they lucked out in that he was literally one of the most transcendent players in NBA history. Kobe Bryant's one of the most marketed players in NBA history, and he's nowhere close to even his contemporaries, right? I would put him below Ray Allen and Steve Nash, who were in the same draft. Obviously, I'd put him below.
Right, but you'd have to admit that the popular opinion would be against you there.
Oh,
right?
Exactly. And I'm saying the difference is Kobe Bryant from day one in the NBA has had big marketers, big people saying, this guy's the next MJ, this guy's the next MJ, this guy's the next MJ. And the scary thing to me is, 20 years later, it clearly works.
And we've talked about this before, right? The big man can never be the best player in the league. It's got to be that wing, outside shooting prototype. There's bias against it. That's why Duncan, wasn't considered better than Kobe.
And I will say that basically happened after Michael Jordan. Before Michael Jordan, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that the bigs ruled the NBA. And if you were going to be a guard that was going to, compete, it was going to be like a Larry Bird, Magic Johnson kind of does everything player. Magic, Larry Bird I'd count as a power forward, even though, goes as a small forward. All right, I'll let you get the last word on Kobe, and then we can move on to the fabulous 76ers.
The only thing the only last word I have about Kobe is, I guess I'm really looking forward to the post-game interviews today. Because my prediction now is somewhere in there, there's going to be a quote where Kobe says, well, he could have scored 30 if he wanted to, but what would that have helped? To which point I'd say, well, honestly, if you just hit twice as many shots as you missed, then that probably would have helped. Because I love how he pretends like, I shot 7 for 25, and he's like, well, I could have scored 35 if I wanted to, but what would that help? And it's like, well, if you're saying you could have gone 14 for 50 and that wouldn't have helped. Yeah, I agree. But if you're saying you could have scored like 7 or 8 more of those baskets that you took and that wouldn't have helped, then no, I don't agree.
I will say we were high on D'Angelo Russell, and I can't think of a worse team to be on than one with Kobe and Nick Young. But geez. All right, so sad day, and it turned out, by the way, I did a poll on this. So I asked my Twitter followers a few days ago which streak was going to end first, the Golden State Warriors winning streak or the 76ers losing streak. People went for the 76ers losing streak. I think that's just because the Warriors are that good, although, man, the Utah Jazz gave them a scare last night. But the 76ers did manage to finally prevail, playing against Kobe Bryant and the Lakers. And a huge part, like we've mentioned, we've teased already on the show, Kobe Bryant shot 7 for 25, and Nerlens Noel came back after a few days of injury and actually looked kind of like his old self. What's kind of funny, Patrick, is we've talked the 76ers a lot over the last 3 years, and we've had good and bad things to say, and this season seems to have been the tipping point where even those of us that have kind of given the 76ers some nice things, we've loved how they've drafted, we've loved that they've let people like Drew Holiday and Spencer Hawes go. What is it about this season that's turned us on the 76ers?
Turned us. So I guess I want to say that from the very get-go, I have always said that the Sam Hinkie process is unnecessary. That, I mean, yeah, it's so I agree that one of the things he's done, quote unquote, right about tanking is he hasn't given away, mid-level exception type contracts to players that won't make a difference. He hasn't wasted bench spots on veterans that are in their late 30s that won't make a difference. He hasn't gone out and acquired guys like Mike Miller or James Jones or Juwan Howard back in the day, who seemed to play like about 10 years longer than he should have because every year he got a 1-year minimum contract as the token veteran in the team, or Jermaine O'Neal back in the day kind of lasted way too long in the NBA for the same reason. Like, he never went out and wasted money that way, which I think is a good thing. At the same time, he is quite clearly not every single year has refused to go out and try to buy like bargain level players who could be efficient and could win games, even though many of those players have been available. He totally could have fielded a team that wins 30 games in the East. There was enough talent on the free agent market, even like talent that is cheap, to do that, but he has steadfastly refused to do that. And I've said over and over and over again, you don't have to lose to tank well. You just have to not care about winning. There's a difference between not caring about winning and actively sort of trying to be bad. And I think that the Sixers have definitely actively tried to construct bad teams, which is just mystifying to me because it's completely unnecessary. He could have, he's had so much cap room available. He could have had so many sort of cheap, undervalued free agents and been winning all this time as well. And clearly that might have cost them 4 or 5 rungs on the lottery ladder. But as you can see from the results they've had so far, that wouldn't have mattered very much anyway. The best rookie the best draft pick they have is Noel, and even though he's regressing a bit this year, and they acquired him via trade anyway.
Well, and also I think the fun thing, Brian and I talked this, I think, a show or two ago, and I think it's still true, is currently their best players are all people that were undrafted. And I mean, you've said stuff like this before where there is talent to be found everywhere. And while we respect the draft, the issue is, even if you draft really well, it's really hard to guarantee they're going to be great. And in fact, what's funny is I'm forgetting his name, but the former GM of the Portland Trail Blazers, maybe Pritchard. I think it was Pritchard. He actually had a Sloan conference where he talked about that and said, you can draft really well 3 years in a row. You got a 40% chance that draft pick hits. It's not inconceivable to miss in 3 consecutive drafts, and then there's your job. So I think the funny thing is the Oklahoma City Thunder did it once and then completely failed at keeping the team together. But the Oklahoma City Thunder had 3 drafts with high picks in a row where bam, bam, bam. In theory, they picked 3 stars that everybody respects, Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. And everybody said that's the way to do it. And, that's happened like once in NBA history where, the team that I talked about in my article this week, the Orlando Magic, it happened to them. But of course, the reason it worked out in their case is they have like a 1 in 100 chance or 1 in 50 chance of getting the number one pick in a really good draft. And that happened. So it's, if you have a 40-win team and you luck into the number one pick, fine. Maybe you can turn into a good team quickly. But barring that, you basically have to be the Thunder. And that requires three players that both look great and turn into great players.
And let's not forget, it took 3 seasons for Kevin Durant to become the superstar he was. He was awful as a rookie. I mean, he had amazingly bad shooting efficiency. He was just awful as a rookie. He wasn't a lot better in his second year, and it wasn't until his third year that, like about halfway through his third year, that suddenly things clicked, and he started rebounding a lot. He started shooting a lot more efficiency. He dropped off a lot of those bad mid-range shots and started shooting lots more shots from three. He became the superstar he is now in his like halfway through his towards the end of his third year. And that's not really super uncommon when you're drafting 19-year-olds, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten worse to the point where, sure, players like I think this is actually one of the first articles I ever blogged about when I hopped into the basketball blogosphere. I think Arturo and I put this together. But back in the day when players stayed in college for 3-4 seasons and the talent level in the NBA was a lot worse, sure, you could get a rookie. You could expect a rookie. I'll phrase it that way. You could expect a rookie like Michael Jordan or, Hakeem Olajuwon or Charles Barkley were going to come in and be impactful immediately. That being the norm has gone by the wayside. We have those players. We have Andre Drummonds and Chris Pauls, and I think Shaq was one as well, but they have gotten scarcer and scarcer as the league has got, as we've gotten more one and dones, as we've gotten more international talent, as we've gotten smarter teams. So it has never, in the last 10 years since a lot of the draft has changed. Basically, the draft that people are thinking of is the Michael Jordan draft of tank to get a good pick and grab a star. That draft has not been in existence for about 20 years now with the invention of the draft lottery and with all the stuff we're saying, younger players. So it's really remarkable to see the number of teams that are still following a strategy that was barely viable 30 years ago and has ceased to be viable in the last 20 years.
Guys, so is the nuance here that tanking for a high draft pick is what's bad, but compiling a lot of whatever picks is good? That's the difference, right?
Sure, but I mean, you don't have to lose games in order to
exactly
picks because only one of those picks is yours, right? Yep. So if the strategy is trade for a shitload of picks and then use them all, well, only the one that is yours is the one that's influenced by how many games you lose. So it doesn't really. I mean, I definitely agree that there's value in. Let me rephrase. I definitely agree that spending a ton of money to chase like 40 wins by buying a bunch of mediocre players is a very bad strategy. But that's not the strategy that anyone is suggesting. That's not the alternative to the process. The alternative to the process is to buy undervalued free agents and cheaply get a team that wins 30 games. And you end up with younger players who learn from older and better players. I mean, there's got to be value, for example, for an NBA rookie to be scrimmaging every day against really good NBA players as opposed to be scrimmaging against other D-League dropouts and undrafted players, right? I mean, you're going to learn so much more slowly if the only experience you get against NBA-level talent is in a game. So there's value in that in terms of player development. There's value in simply winning games and instilling attitudes and virtue into players so that they learn how to be professionals. There's value in that. Nobody's suggesting you have to pay $8 or $9 million a year for Channing Frye, right? That's not what I'm suggesting. The alternative is to get guys like Al-Farouq Aminu on a $3 or $4 million contract, right? To get guys like Brandon Wright who will apparently play for $5 million a year, right? There's the alternatives are not crazy. There would be plenty of ways to win 30 games in Philadelphia, especially given the general state of the East in the last few years. And I said, like, during the offseason, I think it came up, and one of our questions is, like, when do you have to see Philadelphia start making progress in order to say, okay, the process is working? And I said this year. I think, like, not that they have to, win 50 games this year, but that they have to actually show improvement year over year. This would have been the year. Like, it should be seen as a complete disaster that Noel is playing as poorly as he is right now. That should be a very, very big problem for the 76ers, right? And it's clearly a problem that Okafor is like, despite what people are saying, he is by far the worst rookie in the NBA right now, and it's not even close.
Oh, really? So just checking, and this may segue us to our next topic. Has he overtaken my own Denver Nuggets, Emmanuel Mudiay? Is Jahlil Okafor worse than him at this point? I got to check this out.
Well, actually, you know what? Now that you say that, he has not overtaken him, but that is probably just a factor of minutes played.
Take that, Jahlil, and actually,
yeah, you're right. I'm looking at it now, and
he's catching up though, because Jahlil, we've been checking on this week after week, and very first podcast of the new season, Brian and I checked in, and I was looking forward to bashing Derrick Rose, and I had to look and go, well, he's bad, but he's not Emmanuel Mudiay bad. And Jahlil Okafor was bad, but he is going up that like.
So the thing about Jahlil is he's a subpar rebounder. Like, I would actually expect him to be a much better rebounder than he is. I have some hope that that'll improve a little bit. But what's really damning is his assist to turnover ratio is negative. That's really bad, right? He's averaging 1.9 assists and 4.3 turnovers per 48 minutes. And what's really, really, really damning is that his true shooting is 49.3%. And to have your center be that poorly in terms of efficiency from the field is just ugh. And he doesn't get to the free throw line, right? So for a guy who's shooting as much as he is in an offense like that, for him to get to the free throw line only a few times a game, that's a huge, huge red flag. He's getting his shot blocked a lot. He doesn't get to the free throw line. He's just a terrible rookie. And now I'm not saying he's always going to be a terrible player. He might very well develop into a good player, but right now he's a terrible rookie. And Nerlens Noel doesn't look like the player who finished last season. Like his blocks are way down, and that's because they have him playing power forward and he's defending out on the perimeter so much. So he's never in the paint to contest shots. His steals are way down. He's just having a complete regression this year, and those should be big red flags. Because
and also, I think, let's be clear too. He's also been dealing with injury, and that's always so rough to predict for players.
Yeah. But that's another thing is, injuries can happen, and if your process doesn't account for the fact that injuries can happen, then, I mean, that's a flawed process too. There have to be backup plans, right? This is one of the reasons we always say, like, tanking for the number one pick would be a terrible strategy, because some years, through no fault of anybody, despite all the predictions of the scouts and everything, some years your first pick is, is a player like Ralph Sampson who doesn't have a full NBA career, or it's like Greg Oden, or it's like Brandon Roy.
Hey, he had a 20 rebound game in China the other day, I think. Greg Oden,
I mean, or good ones. I mean,
sure, but the point is that an injury cut short his NBA,
of course.
And it had nothing to do with talent evaluation or scouting or any of that.
He was amazing in college, right? He projected very well.
Absolutely, and the few NBA games he did play, he was really good. But that's the thing is, like, the plan would be inherently fragile, because you're essentially to bet everything on the number one pick is to sort of pretend that those kinds of injuries and freak things don't happen, and they happen all the time.
By the way,
it would be crazy to bet the bank on that.
I haven't written this, and I may. And again, I tease like 20 articles a week now that we have so many stories. I love the NBA season being back in full force. But like Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, David Robinson, I think Shaq counts, Derrick Rose, Blake Griffin, Greg Oden. There are so many great NBA players that either had a terrible rookie season like Kevin Durant or LeBron James, or had an injury. Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird all actually had an injury early in their career. Larry Bird's was in college, but still, it's funny that people seem to think that longevity in top prospects is a given when, Michael Jordan was told in his sophomore season there was a chance he might not play again. And so the NBA history for the Bulls, for everybody, is completely different if that happens.
Yeah, Jordan broke his leg in his second year, right?
Yeah, he played like 6. He came back for the playoffs, and that actually this is something that Kobe kind of imitated, which is I believe the Bulls basically said, we don't want you to play. You're the franchise. You're injured. Just get well. And basically Jordan apparently, of the many hills that Jordan fought his career on, including that the entire Bulls organization was against him and his high school coach hated him and all of the other stars in the league thought he was the worst and he always had people saying he wasn't good enough and none of that is true, by the way. But that was one of his things is he basically thought the Bulls were trying to keep him from playing and was yelling at the Bulls doctors for keeping him out of games in his second year when they were like, you have an injury that could potentially end your career if you re-injure it, so stay off of it. So way it goes. I think that's good on the 76ers, and we already started talking rookies. I think we got a good amount on Jahlil Okafor, who is the number 2 worst rookie in the league right now, according to our numbers, behind, as I mentioned, Emmanuel Mudiay. Although he is, I looked at NBA.com's rookie ladder, because he leads rookies in points per game, they still have him in top 3. So there is that. I don't want to bash on Emmanuel Mudiay too much more. I'm curious on, I want one more follow-up from you, Patrick, because you were starting to mention this. How many of these talented players that are going, D'Angelo Russell, Jahlil Okafor, Emmanuel Mudiay, all count? How many of these talented players that basically go to joke organizations, how much of that, think impacts them playing this badly? Because I can't buy that those are good environments for them to develop in. And they're already young, young players we know inherently are not as good as in their prime. So is there hope for, I guess what I'm trying to ask is there hope for Emmanuel Mudiay because he's playing horrible, Jahlil Okafor's playing horrible? Do you think environment changes things or does it just take aging?
Yes, I think that for the same reason that Durant got better. I mean, there's plenty of hope for those players. But I think what happens is, so if you took Emmanuel Mudiay and you put him on a team like the Clippers, for example, right, he would barely play. He would almost never see the floor because it would be very obvious to them in practice that he's super raw and he needs to work a lot on his jumper. He needs to work a lot on his turnovers. He would just never get to play, but he would be practicing against Chris Paul every day and he would probably get better just doing that. So by the time that you actually saw him get significant playing time, he would produce a lot better, right? And so, if you looked at the first 2,000 minutes of that player's career, it would take him 2 seasons to get to that 2,000 minute mark. But those first 2,000 minutes would be so much more productive than Mudiay's first 2,000 minutes in Denver are going to be because they're just throwing him into the fire, right? They're just throwing him into the deep end and he's getting schooled by opposing point guards every single night without a good one to practice against every night. So I think it's just, I guess what I'm saying is that a lot of these players at this age are just as raw and just as bad as these 2 players, but they don't get exposed like these 2 players are getting exposed.
Oh yeah, I hope that's true. And I mean, another name that's on this list, which is unfortunate, is Frank Kaminsky, who I was really high on. But to your point, he's not really getting played. He's in a bad environment, but one advantage he's got is he's not, getting thrown out, every minute. Emmanuel Mudiay, his big thing, and I think you've actually said this. I don't know if we've done a study. But your theory basically is turnovers are one of those things that players as they age get under control.
I think turnovers and fouls are the 2 big things that, and to some extent shooting efficiency does too, because it's not that players become much better shooters. I think there's a little bit of that, but players get a lot more smart about how they can get a good shot against an NBA defense. In their first couple years, when all of the players they're playing against are just so much faster than the competition they're used to playing against, I think players have a lot of trouble finding good shot selection. There are so many areas where they think they're open, but then the defense recovers so much faster than they're used to, and their shots end up being rushed. And so they learn over their first few years, okay, when can I shoot? When am I really open? How do I actually get free? How do I get my shot off? Those things become much better. So their shooting efficiency probably gets a little bit better as they get older. But what really changes the biggest one you see is fouls as players A, learn how to defend in the NBA against the quicker talent, and B, they learn what NBA referees care about. They learn how to play that system because there's certainly a big difference between what you can get away with in college and what you can get away with in the pros. And then third, and this is probably a small but significant effect, that they get a little more respect from referees and they get fewer of those calls where there's a lot of calls in the NBA where veteran goes to the basket, there's some contact with the rookie, ref kind of blows their whistle and blames the rookie. That's just a pretty common thing. So those kinds of situations also dissipate over time. So you definitely see a very big trend in terms of fouls going down, which is why whenever I see a player who has really good numbers in every area but fouls, then I would be very high on that player becoming a good player in the future.
Oh, that is a perfect transition because there's a player that is turning into this in the NBA. I've got to get your thoughts on this guy because he started out pretty raw. He looked pretty terrible. He has become a darling. What are your thoughts on Kristaps Porzingis, who pretty much his only real flaw right now is that if he plays the full 48, he's going to foul out every game. But oh man, he has turned it around something fierce these last 2 weeks.
Yeah, and if you look at his per 48 numbers, his fouls are almost like average for a power forward, um,
Oh,
which is
so he's getting
it's
them under
considerable
control.
considering how he started, right? So, like, you could totally envision that within another 20 games, that number will actually be below average for an NBA power forward.
And he's at 5.5 per 48 right now. 5 per 48 is the average for a
Yeah.
power forward. So he's not that bad.
He's not bad at all considering how he started. And you look at it, I mean, he's an amazing offensive rebounder and shot blocker, and those are two like really big. Those are two things that players tend to be really consistent about and don't get worse over time. So I'd be pretty high on Porzingis right now if I were in New York. I mean, I think his shooting is still a little raw and could use some improvement. But again, that's the thing I always look at is if the non-shooting numbers look good, you should be very high on a player, and his non-shooting numbers look fantastic, right? Great
And
rebounder, great shot blocker, low turnovers. I mean, I think he's going to be I think he's going to be a very good NBA player.
And the other thing about him, to your point on like the shooting, one thing I like looking at this is the last bit of hope I have on Moutier is you see if they can make those shots. Now they can turn into Beasley because I think to your point you were saying as players age they kind of learn, and Beasley is one of those players that he clearly had all the talent in the world to pretty much shoot from anywhere on the court, and his logic always was, well, I'm from mid range and I'm covered. It's too much work to get open. Let's just see what happens.
He just didn't want to take it to the rack. He just didn't. He avoided contact. Even when he did take it to the rack, he did not like contact. He wanted to always finesse it into the rim. Exactly the kind of game that, like, because of his superior athleticism, worked fine in the NCAA. Just didn't translate to the NBA, unfortunately.
All right, so another darling that we expected to be good, and he's for a rookie is playing quite well. He's not star level yet, but we should stress this, that basically the average rookie is maybe what I think 50-60% as good as an average NBA player, if that makes any sense to those listeners. So the fact that Karl Anthony Towns, the number one pick, is playing about 50% better than an average center, very good sign. But the two players I want to talk, they made my top 10 list. I do the top 10 box scores every week, and the two were Rondé Hollis-Jefferson and TJ McConnell. Now, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, he's one of these players, I can only deal with so much of your hate. Like, I called Andre Iguodala a top 10 player early in the season. He was playing, and I think he still is. I don't know if he still holds this, but Andre Iguodala, I think, had the best three-point shooting efficiency in the league at some point this season. So that's part of why he's so amazing. But Rondé Hollis-Jefferson is one of these that no one is going to look at and think is a Rookie of the Year candidate. But this is a shooting guard, small forward that's basically if you played him the full 48 minutes, you could expect him to steal a ball every couple minutes and is rebounding like a big. And so I love this guy because he's not gonna look impressive. He doesn't have the points. I actually looked at like his production for that game, Patrick. So against Cleveland, where they almost beat the Cavaliers, he put up this insane production. I think points over par was like 20. And I looked and I was like, this does not look like a good game until I went, he's a shooting guard that pulled down 5 steals and 10 rebounds, including 7 offensive. That's absurd.
Yeah, I have not actually seen him play. I have not seen Brooklyn play a single game this year, so I can't talk about visually, but statistically, when you look at his comps, he looks a lot like, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist or Al-Farouq Aminu or a guy like that, like an amazing rebounder.
How about Tony Allen? Oh, no, he's not even that good of a rebounder, though.
Well, yeah, he's an absolutely amazing rebounder. He's low turnovers, decent shot blocker for that position. And obviously he gets a ton of steals. So this is another guy I'd be really high on because you look at the personal foul number and that's a little bit high, and that's because he's a rookie. That's going to get better. And then you look at the shooting numbers and you have to think that's going to get a little bit better. And for a player like that to be a really good NBA player, he doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to be Ray Allen. He just has to be average efficiency. If you put average efficiency with superstar defense, you have a star player. That's just basketball is a two-way game. Not every player is going to be a two-way player. So if you take a guy who's just average on the offensive end and he's like top 10 on defense, then by definition that guy's a star. And I think that, he looks like he has the potential to become that. But again, I'm only looking at numbers. I have not even seen the guy play. So I can't offer a lot of opinion about him, in terms of evaluating his potential.
And like I said, I was just tickled pink because this is one of those deceptive players. And over the years, I've just kind of gotten used to it. But, every freaking year someone goes, how can you put so-and-so this high on your list, over this and this player? So how can you put Rondae Hollis-Jefferson above Jahlil Okafor? It's like, well, Jahlil Okafor is a center that doesn't really do the things a center needs to do and doesn't shoot very well. Rondae Hollis-Jefferson's a shooting guard that pretends he's a center. That's if you can do that, if you can cheat, if you can put out someone at shooting guard that does that, and I should know, like I started looking over some of the Brooklyn box scores. It's not like Thad Young and Brook Lopez aren't getting rebounds and blocks. So it's not, I always hate that trope of stealing rebounds. It's like it's not like the bigs on the team aren't also getting steals and blocks. It's that this guy is adding a lot to that. All right, I got to talk one more rookie, Patrick. TJ McConnell. I love this guy. Has yet to, I believe, unless he did it while I wasn't watching the box score, he has yet to make a free throw in the NBA. He's only attempted one in...
Which is a pretty big red flag.
Well, it's interesting because he shoots very well, and his shot chart looks pretty good. So he's got super high efficiency and shoots really well, but doesn't get to the line, which is remarkable.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add to that. I think you're exactly on the money there. But I mean, part of it is he shoots well, but he doesn't tend to go to the rack a lot. So that's not going to get you to the line a lot.
Well, we'll have to see what he does because, he's dishing well. And I mean, this is, like I said, he's the one bright spot for the 76ers who they got from the D League, not even through the draft. And there you go. Yeah. Any other rookies you want to talk?
Oh, the only thing I'll say is that I think Karl Anthony Towns would be leading all rookies in points and rebounds if he would get more playing time. I mean, it's kind of remarkable how much Sam Mitchell keeps Karl Anthony Towns on the bench, given that he's arguably their best player. I mean, Rubio's their best player, but there's reasons that Rubio sits because of injury and stuff like that. So in the games where Rubio's not playing, Karl Anthony Towns is probably their best player, and yet he really doesn't get a lot of playing time in the fourth quarter, and that doesn't make any sense to me. But then again, a lot of things that Sam Mitchell does don't make any sense to me. I'm actually working on a set of vines to create an article about that myself. So
love it. I mean, nothing new from the T-Wolves. They've been one of the luckiest franchises in terms of talent, but one of the worst on executing. And yeah. It's amazing. I can't believe they've had Garnett, Love, and possibly Towns at this point. Apparently has to have a first name that starts with K, but what are you going to do? All right. We're about at time, but I was going to say, did you want to get your last thought? We went a little long on rookies, but you just wanted to touch briefly. It's kind of fascinating. Essentially, I believe Steve Kerr is officially the head coach. So I think all the wins are counting towards him, but Luke Walton, the interim coach, is undefeated. And you had some thoughts on that, where you basically said it's not a dig on either Kerr or Carr, sorry, on Carr or Walton.
No, you had it. It's Kerr.
No, it's Kerr. Sorry. So Kerr or Walton, but it is an interesting point. I wanted you to get that in before the end of the show.
I guess I just see a lot of people on Twitter kind of talking about how, they say, well, look how well Luke Walton's doing. Isn't that evidence that Steve Kerr is overrated and not really doing anything? And I just think that's got to be that's crazy talk, because I think the vast majority of what a head coach needs to do is install a system and install an environment that fosters cooperation and professionalism. And if the head coach does that successfully, then that system can live on without them. I think that's what Popovich very much tries to do in San Antonio. and what Kerr has done an exceptionally great job of in Golden State. And the biggest thing to me is the immense contrast to Mark Jackson before him, because it was very clear that Mark Jackson wanted all the credit for everything and he wanted all the control over everything. And that didn't get him very far. Whereas Kerr's entire philosophy from the get go has been to sort of it's been very zen. It's been very, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to trust people. I'm going to put people I like in charge, and then um, I'm gonna let them do what they're good at. And he doesn't take credit for things that other people do well. When Dennis Rodman came over last year and had all those quotes about how Steve Kerr's not really doing any coaching. He's just letting those guys play. Steve Kerr's reaction was, yeah, pretty much that's what I'm doing, which is exactly the kind of humble response you would expect from a guy who's trying to foster that kind of system and that atmosphere and that, I'll call it corporate culture, that a team, I think, needs in order to be championship caliber. So the fact that Luke Walton is succeeding so well here is really an affirmation of what Kerr is doing. It's not a condemnation of it. And I think here's a thought process. Let's say Popovich developed back problems and had to sit out for 20 games and put Becky Hammon in charge. Would any of us really be surprised if the Spurs went, 17-3 in those 20 games?
Well, I mean, remember she won, I believe, coach of the the preseason or summer league or whatever.
What I'm saying is it's not about her being better than Pop or even as good as Pop. It's about the fact that the system that Pop put in place is going to be there even when he's not there directly to supervise it. And that's what good teams and good corporations do, is they create winning systems. They create productive systems. They foster environments in which all employees or teammates or whatever or coaches can be productive, so that it can work without them. They're not like monarchies that fall apart as soon as the king leaves town.
Off with his head.
Well, what I'll say, and by the way, I was looking up this quote because what you just said reminded me of it. So there's a Napoleon quote, and I believe it's his. So many famous quotes are attributed to the wrong person, but he says, "Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake." And I feel it's the same. Phil Jackson, back in the day, that was one of the things. He didn't yell at players. He didn't call frequent timeouts. So many coaches, we believe, to manage have to, call timeouts when games go wrong and yell at players and all this stuff and yell at refs. And I think the good coaches are the ones that, we haven't even talked this yet, and I'm excited to hear about it. So teasing people for future show, future article. Patrick, you've got more thoughts on three-point shooting versus mid-range twos. And I mean, I think the Warriors, basically one of the big things Kerr seems to have done based on Mark Jackson's Warriors versus Kerr's was he basically said, look, guys, we're not taking enough threes. You're really good at threes. You should take fewer of these mid-range shots and take more of these threes. And whatever you have to do to make that happen, if Steph Curry has to, out-dribble Anthony Davis and shoot over his head, fine, do it. But they have that in place, and I do think that is key. And I think to your point, once you get those systems in place and have the trust of the players and the trust of the management, it can be a great thing, and I think that's what we're seeing in the Warriors.
And I got one thing on this. It's just to add to what Patrick said, it's not like Steve Kerr is barred from all communication with the team. He's there in practice every day, talking with the players, talking with Luke Walton. He's even been traveling with the team lately to road games. So Steve Kerr is still involved for sure. He's just not the actual guy on the bench because he's got a bad back.
Yep.
Yeah, not that I think that Walton's X's and O's in play calling have been bad. Far from it. I just think that people kind of completely overestimate the impact that has.
I'd agree. All right, so I think that's our show. I think I'm ready for shout-outs unless you have anything you want to add, Patrick.
I got nothing I want to add now.
All right, so I'm ready for shout-outs. Brian, Patrick, if you have any, I forgot to ask you pre-show, so I'm walking without a net. I do have a
shout-out.
But I'll start with mine. So Tabitha, I hope I'm saying that right, A. Davidson did a great article on Bloomberg about Kobe Bryant and basically said a lot of the things we said. She said, which Kobe Bryant will fans remember? And kind of talks about how she compares him to Jeter, which is an A+ in my book. She does bring up that he's good. He's got good numbers like per and win shares. I actually had a back and forth with her about why I didn't like per, and she actually does include a link to why per may be overrated. But her basic point is fans seem to just be remembering everything great about Kobe. She even brings up, brave thing to do in an article, but she brings up the 2003 rape case. She kind of says it's kind of weird for fans just remember all the good and forget all the bad. And if there is kind of a player that epitomizes our thoughts on basketball statistics, basically people always focus on the goods, points per game, ignore all the bad misses and stuff. Kobe is it. Fantastic article. I'll include it in the links. It's on Bloomberg.com. Tabitha Davidson. Follow her on Twitter. Read the article. That's my shout out.
All right, I'll go next. I've got an esports shout out. Got a heavy heart for all of us nerds today. Or actually, I guess it was yesterday or the day before. But anyway, that's right. KT Rolster Flash is retiring. Lee Young-ho himself. He's one of the greatest StarCraft players of all time. He had an 8-year career as a professional player. And bear in mind, in Korea, it's not like the U.S. even now. He was like a teen idol on TV all the time. And yeah, at 23 years old, he's retiring for his compulsory military service, which all Korean males have to go through. So, yeah, we'll miss him. He was a great player.
All right, and you got any shout-outs, Patrick?
I'll just give a shout-out to Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, who has posted a lot about the Walton Kerr thing in the last few days, and I think his thoughts sum up what I was just trying to say probably in a more eloquent manner. So go give a read to his Twitter account and stuff he writes for ESPN, because I think it's very insightful stuff.
Yeah, and I will say if you're following us and not, I mean, Ethan Sherwood-Strauss is just fantastic on Twitter, fantastic writer, must follow. So I can't disagree with that. All right, that's been our show. We'll be back next week to talk what else? More basketball. If you found the show not through the site, we are on boxscoregeeks.com. You can find us on Stitcher and iTunes, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upvote, all that helps. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. We don't quite have a set schedule. It's based around when Patrick and I are available. So spoiler, you have to follow us on Twitter, NBA Geek, Nerd Numbers, or Boxscore Brian. We'll tell you when we're going live. It's usually Tuesday or Wednesday around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you've got any fantastic box scores from the week, usually basketball, but if you have other ones too, tweet them at me, #BSG Top 10. With that, we'll see you next week.